Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is the 14th of October 2025, a Tuesday. And today we'll be talking about my overall macro perspective and the strategy for the next quarter and potentially quarters after that, and how I plan on playing the crypto market with a particular focus on the altcoin market. So I'm going to give you an overall framework today, and then we'll discuss some nuances on that. And please feel free to put your comments and descriptions, comments or questions in the comments below. I'll try and get to as many of those as I can. And again, this is not financial advice, so do your own research. And as I'm making this video, Bitcoin is about 113K, Ethereum about 4.1K, Caspa just above 6 cents, and Fartcoin around 43 cents. So, uh, in order to understand the altcoin market, the overall structure that I'm using, and a lot of my knowledge has come from the work that Ben Cowen has done into the Cryptoverse, and I'll leave a link to his latest video there, which will also add some more nuance onto what I'm discussing here. So it's certainly worthwhile taking a look. Um, so the metric that we can use to try and understand how the altcoin market relative to the overall crypto market has moved in the past is using total 3, that is the total market cap of the crypto market minus Bitcoin minus Ethereum, minus USDT because that's a stable coin, divided by Bitcoin. And as you can see, it's got some pretty big gyrations, right? There are times in the cycle when altcoin valuations shoot way up and the altcoin forms a bigger proportion of the overall market, and times when it will drop down considerably around here, here, and as we can see right about now, it's also dropped down quite a bit, right? So the value around now is around 0.37. And a different way of looking at this is the same thing. Instead of just USDT, is also add USDC, because USDC I think is around 70 billion or so, and USDT is around 170 billion or so. I think those are rough numbers. So USDC is also significant, but USDC hasn't been around for quite so long. But you can also see these are measures of the altcoin market relative to Bitcoin. All right. And what I like to do is apply my PAI metric to looking not just at individual cryptos, but also the overall crypto market as a whole. And you can see that it's really done quite a good job in this case. In this case, we're looking at the total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, the same graph as here, but I've applied the PAI metric to it. So if you look at the entire cycles or the entire time length, you'll see that it was calling these are real-time values, so that the 2018 value is only looking at the values that occurred before, not applying a retrospective look to it. So these are the values that we would have got in real time. So when we don't have that much information, the reliability of these values goes down. But as you can see, as time goes on, these become quite accurate, right? So initially it's calling for the blue over here. We also have the dark blue over here, and the PI metric is 0 is a good time to buy, 1 is a good time to be very cautious. It could go higher, but let's be super cautious. And you can see it calls the blue over here, but then as the algo goes on, it's learning, or it could have gone down further. And so it becomes better and better at calling these bottoms, right? And you can see that it was calling a bottom in 2017, even though it had not that much history to go on, but still accurate enough. Then it called the bottom in June 2018, but the price went down further. But generally, whenever it's been blue or dark blue, we've had chances to get out at higher valuations sooner or later, and it becomes more accurate. So right now, it's got about 3,000 days of information on it, so it's doing quite a good job, right? And you can see that in the previous cycles, there was always a dark blue region, right? And if we believe that the crypto market repeats, and it seems to repeat every 4 years. We've seen those residuals in the power law, right? They seem to peak every 4 years. That's why everyone's hoping for alt season in this quarter, because it peaks every 4 years. If we believe things repeat, then the theory goes is that we should be expecting the same sort of values as we have here, the same sort of PAI values to occur again. And we haven't had those PAI values as yet, right? And if we look at those PAI values, we're now at about 0.4. In order to get to 0.1, that means from about 38 cents, this is just a ratio here, 38, we'd be all the way down to about 24, right? So that would be almost a drop of 40%, which is a considerable drop in the altcoin market. Now, this is not the Bitcoin market. This could be just the this is the ratio of the altcoin market to the Bitcoin market, right? So we could have lower ratios by Bitcoin going up and the altcoins remaining at the same level, or Bitcoin going down and altcoins going down even more, or Bitcoin staying the same and altcoins going down. And again, this is an overall market assessment. There are going to be individual cryptos that might do particularly well. I'm not going to talk about those right now, but I'll give you some sort of hints as to what I think might do particularly well later on in the video. But it gives us an idea of what has happened in the past. And we don't know whether this exact same thing is going to repeat in the future, but that is a possibility. And if that is a possibility, we are still looking at further drop downs in the altcoin market relative to Bitcoin. And so even with the crazy action that we've had in the last few days, we may not be in a position where the altcoin market is a good place to be in consistently, right? And so if you look at total 3 minus USDT over here, we see this drop over here, but then we've jumped up also, right? Which we can see on the 4 hour a little more clearly. So if you're buying around this point and as the overall altcoin market is shooting up, you're making good money, right? So for example, if you bought in Fartcoin or Caspa when they were below 5 cents for the PAI values that I was talking about, those are still good buying opportunities, but it's a mean reversion trade, right? And that doesn't mean that overall, if you're holding for the longer term or even medium term, those are going to be great trades. So it may be best to go get in, make what you want, make some money, and get out, because likely the overall trajectory of the market could be going down if we believe things would rhyme. And the logic that I have behind this and understanding whether we are going to repeat this again is pretty much as follows, right? If the altcoin markets are going to, if the altcoin market is going to do well, Bitcoin has to do well. It's unusual, it's a possibility, but I think it's a very small possibility that Bitcoin stays where it should stay, where it is right now at 112K, but all the other altcoins take off and alt season begins. Typically, Bitcoin has to appreciate significantly, and then that monetary energy passes through Ethereum and then onto the altcoin market, right? And so I think right now it still makes the most sense to remain heavy Bitcoin. I know in the past we've talked about Caspa and the PAI levels, for particularly for Caspa, and now we're about 0.2 level, which is historically a good historically a good value to buy. So I don't think it's a bad time to start DCAing in. But if we are looking at a 20-30% drop down in the Caspa value, assuming relative to Bitcoin, so assuming Bitcoin stays the same, altcoin market continues to drop, we'd see values more around sort of the more around the 5 cent region, right? And so for me, it feels that the right thing to be is cautious right now and to be more heavy in Bitcoin, because if we are going to have an alt season, Bitcoin has to go higher. And if we don't have an alt season, Bitcoin is probably going to remain the most stable place to be, right? While altcoins go down. It will be unusual if altcoins really shot up without Bitcoin hitting all-time highs. And right now in Q4 2025, I would have expected our prices to be closer to about 140K in terms of Bitcoin, which is not where we are right now. We're at 113. And so even with the gyrations in the market over these last couple of days, we still were in the 120s, not around the 140s. So the assessment from my side is that we should be really cautious, and being Bitcoin heavy is probably the right strategy to go. Again, certain altcoins will do well, but overall, I think it makes a lot of sense looking at this chart to say, hey, Bitcoin is probably going to do, looking at this chart and also just seeing how the altcoin market has generally played out, right? So Bitcoin is likely going to do well. And if Bitcoin doesn't really do well, it's very difficult for alt season to start. And some cryptos are going to do well regardless, but it's really hard to choose which ones of those are going to be. Okay, so that's the overall perspective, and and adding more color to what's going on is that typically we've been looking at a 4-year cycle repeating, right? And that's based around the halving of Bitcoin, and the year after the halving, Bitcoin tends to do really well. But why does that happen, and do we care? So Raoul on Twitter did a really interesting tweet that I thought made a lot of sense, and it's a different perspective in which he says, look, it's all based around liquidity and also the PMI, right? The PMI is a reflection is produced by the Institute of Supply Management, and it's a measure that goes from that is has a neutral value of around 50 over here, right? And when it's above 50, the economy is starting to expand, and when it's below 50, it's contracting, right? And so what his take is, like, look, the PMI has matched has been closely tracking, or has the Bitcoin pricing is closely correlated with the ISM pricing, right? And so in this case, the reason we haven't had the prices shoot up as yet, because we haven't had the liquidity as yet, so the economy hasn't really improved that much, and we're not really seeing those high Bitcoin prices because of this ISM, or the liquidity conditions and the PMI expectations, etc., right? And so until that shoots up, we really can't expect a lot of liquidity flowing into, or the liquidity causing the PMI to shoot up, and expectations, etc. And so essentially, alt season is going to be delayed because there's not enough liquidity in the system, and you can track that by this PMI index. Now, that is again going to be one of those, what is the driving reason, and we can always come up with narratives to justify, hey, Bitcoin's not rising as fast as it should be, so it is going to shoot up, but it's going to happen later on in the game, right? And again, I think the narratives follow the price action, so we have all sorts of reasoning that we will come up with to justify the price moving in a particular direction, right? And I think the safest place to be in right now, probably the best risk-adjusted return, is going to be Bitcoin. I know we want all season because of the tremendous gains that it can have, but if Bitcoin doesn't shoot to all-time highs, none of this all season stuff is going to matter. And so for that case, we have been talking about Caspa. I do think it is a reasonable proposition to buy it below the zero point 0.2 PAI. I feel that's a fairly confident measure. But look, we could have 20, 30, 40% drops on that, right? So unless you are really a holder in the long term, it's best to use the dynamic DCA and start buying more the lower we get in the PAI. Right, it's at a better point now, around 6 cents, than it was last week when it was 7.5 cents. But again, if we are headed downwards in the overall market, and if history is going to rhyme, then we can expect lower prices to come through. Or in US, even if the price doesn't shift in US dollar terms, it does change in Bitcoin terms, because Bitcoin would go up relative to the altcoin market, right? And so that's sort of what I want to leave you guys with. The two perspective is that we might, it's hard for me to assign probabilities, but I'd say it's north of 50%, 50, 60% that we continue to see a drop in the altcoin market. Definitely in terms of Bitcoin. I can't be sure in terms of USD. And so Bitcoin's likely going to be the safest place to be. We know historically it's done really well in Q4 after the halving year. That's Q4 2025. So that's a safe bet. And if it does well, we can always move those funds into alt season as it starts taking off. But the path to alt season is through Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin doesn't come to all-time highs in US dollar terms, then I don't think alt season is really going to happen. Maybe there will be exceptions or not. The ISM provides this idea that the Bitcoin, or that alt season and the liquidity and all-time highs are going to happen later on in the next year. I think that's a reasonable proposition. But again, if I think we got to understand that it would mean a change in what's been happening from the last 8 years or so, in the last two cycles. If you are going to play the alt game, though, switching gears on this, the ones that I've identified based on my social dominance metric over here are the ones that have a disproportionate number of social chatter relative to their market cap. And in terms of memes, it's NPC and Fartcoin. Casp also does quite highly, as well as does BitTensor. So these sort of would be the plays that I think likely they would drop the most, but when the market does drop, these probably shoot up the fastest. That's kind of what I've seen in terms of Fartcoin, right? Which is something I talked about, which had stabilized. Let's take a quick look at the chart over here. That we're looking at the 7-day chart, right? It was around 67 cents. It bounced down in the craziness to around 35. This may be up about 20% or so. So not bad. Of course, it went down a lot lower in the flash crash, but isn't doing too badly. But again, Caspa has also done the same thing, right? We went down to around, let's see, 5 cents or so. Let's see what it shows up on this chart. And again, we've probably gone up about 20. Actually, yeah, I guess you can say it's gone up about 20% or so. So not doing too badly. And again, these seem to correlate with these ones over here. Tau has done particularly well. If you look at Solana, I don't think Solana has done quite so well, but we can take a look. Here we go. And we'll see how far did it. I think it didn't actually drop down that much, right? So it dropped down to 180, and now it's around 200. So that's about a 10% jump, right? So I think these are coins that will do well based on the amount of social chatter that's going in. It's not completely hard and fast, but it does give us some directionality in how to play this. And those would be good mean reversion plays for right now. But again, I would be cautious about marrying these coins and expecting to have those amazing 2, 3, 4, 10x gains, because I just don't think the overall market is primed for this to happen. Long story short, stay heavy Bitcoin and see how things evolve over the next couple of months. But right now is a good time to be cautious. And if you are going to be playing, and we are going to be playing the altcoin markets, DCAing in slowly is probably the right play to do. So I hope this was helpful and gives you guys a perspective of where I am and what I'm seeing as the overall strategy. I don't think all season is around the corner quite as yet. So let's see what happens with Bitcoin, and based on that, we'll be able to make a much tighter assessment on where things are heading in the near future. So please like and subscribe to the video, and do sign up for the newsletter at powerlawinvestor.com. I'll leave a link in the description below, and also description to Ben's video in which he talks about the altcoin market and his perspective, which I broadly agree with, even though I'm using a PAI to try and figure out how those things are going to be in terms of what levels we're going to see. So all the best, and see you on the next one.